You're going to love this one. It's amazing. Coronavirus is killing more men, but the lockdown is disastrous for women and their rights. Okay. All right. It's fair to point out, simply because men are dying doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about women losing their rights. But I was reading this story and I thought of something funny. We'll read through this, but they have this section right here. Women's rights as an afterthought. And I thought to myself, what do you mean as an afterthought? They should be an afterthought. You know why? Because people are dying, right? That's the argument. Now, of course, I'm being facetious. I am a freedom over security person any day of the week. I lean towards liberty. I recognize the importance of security, responsibility, but I'm always going to be about freedom and liberty. Here's what I find fascinating. They tell us to stay in our homes, to give up our rights, not to protest. Our rights are an afterthought, male or female. Why? To save lives. Why should it be any different for women if you single them out? If a woman had to give up some money and it meant it would save lives, wouldn't that be the right thing to do? If we're all going to give up our rights for security anyway, don't lives come first? Men are 50% more likely to die from coronavirus than women. If women had to take extra precautions to make sure those men don't die, is that not unreasonable based on your own standards? Now, as for me, I'm more of an individualist, which means no, man or woman doesn't matter. You live your life, and if you're scared, protect yourself. That means men have a responsibility to protect their own lives. But you get the point I'm trying to make, right? Let's read the story from CNN. The novel coronavirus seems to be more deadly for men, but in many other ways, women are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. From a spike in domestic violence and restricted access to family planning services to disproportionate economic impact, the lockdown measures put in place to stop the outbreak are hurting women and their basic rights a lot more than men. Previous epidemics of Ebola and Zika have resulted in major setbacks for women and girls in the regions most affected by the outbreaks. And experts and activists are warning the same thing is happening globally right now. That's true. And I've talked about it too, that women's rights and feminism exists in a protective sphere. It's a fact, man. You look at stories of women hiking in Morocco, and what do you think happens? You look at stories of female journalists in Egypt, and what do you think happens? A lot of the things that we have here that the leftists in this country take for granted only exist because we are a dominant superpower. That's just reality. When faced with a real crisis, you will see people lose their rights 100%. And guess what? Men are more likely to die. Isn't that typically the case in war and conflict? In a world war, guess what? People lose their rights. I don't like it at all. And men are more likely to die, substantially more likely to die, like 98% more likely to die. Let's read a little bit more. A CNN analysis earlier this year found that in the countries for which data was available, men were 50% more likely than women to die after being diagnosed with COVID. Quote, "We think about this crisis in very narrow terms, only focusing on the health impacts, but we're missing the bigger picture," said Julia Smith, a researcher at the Simon Fraser University in Canada. Smith is working on a multi-year project looking at the wider impact of the pandemic. Men are having worse healthcare outcomes if they become infected. But when we think about the secondary impacts, here we see that women are being disproportionately affected. What does that mean, disproportionately affected? I'm going to stop right there and just say, listen, if men are more likely to die based on your own rules of identity politics, shouldn't women then have special rules assigned to them to protect that? Hold on. Women should check their privilege. How about them apples, right? Women have the privilege of being less likely to die from coronavirus, so of course they can go around making demands while the rest of us men die. They're the privileged majority in this case. Shouldn't they have to give up something to protect us because we're in the oppressed minority? I'm kidding, by the way, but you get the point. The pandemic is worsening problems women were facing even before it started. Crises like this exacerbate already existing structural inequalities in society. When it comes to women's rights, women's health, and women's economic status, this is exactly what we're seeing now. Women's health, men are dying. Okay? Dying. Women's rights is an afterthought. Smith said that when marginalized groups are underrepresented at the decision-making table, their rights and needs are often forgotten. And unfortunately, women's rights are almost always an afterthought in any crisis situation. What does marginalized mean? Or underrepresented? Let's step outside of politics for a second. I understand, it's mostly men who are in politics, right? But let's talk about general cultural and social behavior. women make up the majority of society in general, at least in the United States, like 51%. Therefore, they are the majority, not the oppressed or marginalized minority. Men are more likely to die from COVID. Therefore, they are being oppressed, and therefore they're in the minority. Okay, the marginalized and oppressed minority by a thin margin is men. Therefore, shouldn't women give up a little bit just to make sure that we can keep equality, right? We want an equality of outcome. Here's what they say is the virus started spreading around the world. Many governments abruptly announced strict lockdowns, confining most citizens to their homes. While this helped slow down the outbreak, authorities in a number of countries recorded a worrying consequence: spikes in domestic violence. Now, that is a very, very serious problem, for sure. I think we can all agree on that one. Many activists say it was painfully obvious that such abuse would increase in a lockdown situation. Numerous studies have shown that stressful events, such as economic downturns or natural disasters, often lead to higher instances of gender-based violence. Now, hold on. They say spikes in domestic violence. They don't mention the breakdown. Is it more men than women? They make an assumption that it's just men beating women. Imagine all the women that have been locked down with a man that is causing them harm. Imagine all the men that have been locked down with a woman causing them harm. You want to give me the hard numbers on who's abusing who? I think most of us often assume it's the dude abusing the woman, but it is true that women abuse men. And it's a large percentage too. So what? What's your point? Here's what they say. The vast majority of countries, domestic violence was not something governments addressed in any way when announcing the policy. This should be a top of the mind. What are you supposed to do? You lock people in their houses. What are you going to have the police go door to door? Let's jump down to the pay gap because I don't have enough time for this one. Women on the front lines. The majority of health workers are women. Men in healthcare earn more than women. Now, here's what's fascinating. The global health and social sector has 234 million workers. It's 67% women, 33% men. But then they say this: women's earnings versus men's earnings. Men in health earn on average 28% more than women. Now here, CNN actually does a fairly decent job. They point out 10% can be explained by men and women doing different jobs. Thank you. Finally. 7% because women are working fewer hours. Thank you, CNN. And a gap of 11% remains, even when equal jobs and equal hours are compared. All that means is you don't know what's causing it yet. That's it. The assumption that it's caused by sexism is wrong. I could equally assume the 11% gap remains because women like doing cartwheels. I could make something up. Now, I get it. Sexism is a more likely than women just happen to break out in spontaneous cartwheeling all over the place. It makes no sense. Thus, they get paid less. But there are really easy explanations for this. Men and women negotiate differently. But if you're going to make up something, you can make up anything you want. Women are more likely to spend time putting on makeup and taking longer breaks, I guess. I guess you could attribute that to working fewer hours. But what they do is they often jump to say it's bigotry. Sorry, you don't got the evidence for that. In the U.S., several states officials opted to include elective abortions in the medical procedure limited during the coronavirus outbreak. This is potentially dangerous effects. Yeah, okay. Financial hardship. Here we go. Women are hit harder by job losses. This may be due to the fact that women are more likely to work in the service sector. They actually say this. A lot of industries that are being most affected by the outbreak, tourism and other service industries, care worker sector. Those industries tend to be dominated by women, Smith said. I don't see the problem at all. I think we've effectively come to a reality. Women, this is perfect. Everything's perfect. Check it out. We're not asking women specifically because of their gender to stop doing things that could get men sick. We're just saying service jobs are done. You're gone. Okay? We're locking down. Now, it was a bad idea based on the science we've seen so far. But because women are more likely to work in the care industry and the service sector, they're more likely to be disproportionately affected by this. They're also more likely to survive the virus. So if women are taking 10% more job losses, but it means less men will die, isn't that the right thing to do? Let me ask you this way. If you're a woman and you were asked, you need to quit your job right now, otherwise that man will die, would you do it? You'd be like, I have no choice. Or better yet, if somebody was holding a weapon to someone's face, saying like, I'm going to end their life unless you leave this job right now, you would do it. You'd be like, okay, we all would. It's called a hostage situation. If the virus is putting pressure on men and you're asked, we ask your business shut down, doesn't it make sense to save lives? Now, here's the point I'm trying to make. Not that I'm actually arguing for that. I'm arguing that If you want a world in which we must give up our rights for security, don't be surprised if it disproportionately affects women. You can't expect to have these identity politics-based rules and then not expect to feel the brunt of it when it turns out you are the privileged oppressor. Plain and simple. You ask for these rules because in the circumstances you bring up, it might be favorable towards men. There are more male CEOs. Well, that's a fact. Okay, we got to get more women CEOs. You're right. There's also more male sewage workers. Got to get more female sewage workers. Whoa, what's that? Women aren't applying to be sewage workers? You see the problem here. Women are now facing the brunt of policies in many ways that negatively impact men. If women are more likely to work in the service industry and they're being hurt by this, I don't see the problem at all. The greater problem is that everyone is being hurt by this period. But anyway, you get the point. They want to make it about gender when literally men are dying. I'm sorry. If I had to choose between holding up a sign demanding suffrage for women and pulling a guy, from like grabbing a guy's arm about to fall to his death, I'm going to save the person's life. And when it comes to a real crisis, you can see exactly what happens to social justice. It's not a good thing. I'm not happy about it. It's reality. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.